Number 2.
Mr. Speaker.
I call the Honourable Rodney Hyde.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move that the Regulatory Reform Bill be now read a first time. At the appropriate time, I intend to move that the bill be referred to the Commerce Select Committee. The Regulatory Reform Bill amends 13 Acts of Parliament and is designed to reduce compliance costs and the regulatory burden on business, a good thing. It is intended that the bill be divided into separate bills at the Committee of the Whole House stage. The Acts put forward for amendment by ministers from 8 portfolios have been identified through a number of avenues, including through the regulatory scanning exercise undertaken by government departments. Agencies have been asked to undertake scanning of their legislation as part of the commitment this government has to the government statement on regulation, better regulation, less regulation. The statement was announced on August 2009 and sets out the government's commitment to introduce new regulation only when satisfied that it was required, reasonable and robust, review existing regulation in order to identify and remove requirements that are unnecessary, ineffective or excessively costly. And this, Mr. Speaker, is the second of what I intend will become an annual bill in this House. It forms a key part of the government's commitment to an ongoing process for amending legislation to remove requirements that are unnecessary, that are ineffective or that are excessively costly, and sometimes all three. Such an omnibus bill will ensure that the smaller regulatory fixes do not fall off the legislative agenda and are able to be progressed in a timely fashion to deliver the flow-on benefits to business and to the economy. A key benefit of this bill is the efficient, cost-effective method of collectively amending the 13 Acts through a single omnibus bill, without having to proceed with 13 separate pieces of legislation. The maintenance of a quality regulatory environment in New Zealand requires a body of legislation that is easy to use, that is up to date and that is fit for purpose. The changes proposed in this bill cover a diverse range of policy areas and legislation, but they're all aimed at the same objective, reducing the compliance burden on business. This objective is the unifying theme of the clauses in the Regulatory Reform Bill, which I'm introducing to the House today. In October 2009, Mr. Speaker, I wrote to all ministers requesting suggestions for amendments to discrete pieces of legislation that would reduce the compliance burden upon business and were suitable for inclusion in the Omnibus Bill. I'd like to thank my colleagues who have responsibility for the Acts put forward for amendment in this bill. The Honourable Simon Power, Minister of Commerce, the Honourable Stephen Joyce, Minister for Communications and Information Technology, the Honourable Phil Heatley, Minister for Fisheries and Aquaculture, the Honourable Kate Wilkinson, Minister for Food Safety and Minister of Conservation, the Honourable Maurice Williamson, Minister for Building and Construction, and the Minister of Statistics, the Honourable Nathan Guy, Associate Minister of Justice, and the Minister of Internal Affairs. The prioritisation of these amendments will contribute to businesses being better able to reach their full potential and the greatest opportunity for growth. Some of the changes are aimed at removing requirements and streamlining processes. These include amending the Companies Act 1993 to allow companies to choose whether or not to use electronic shareholder participation. It is estimated that this change could save New Zealand companies a total of $1.5 million each year. Amending the Agricultural Compounds and Veterinary Medicines Act 1997, the Animal Products Act 1999 and the Wine Act 2003 to align and streamline the procedures for recognition under these 3 food safety-related acts will save businesses from potential compliance costs of approximately $100,000 a year. People or agencies wanting recognition for functions such as sampling, testing, analysing, evaluating and verifying compliance under these acts should find the process simplified and being recognised under more than one act significantly less complicated. And then, Mr. Speaker, amending the Fisheries Act 1996 to allow for the consolidation of gazette notices to make it easier for commercial fishermen to find what restrictions apply to particular stocks. Consolidation of Gazette notices will mean that there could be one notice, for example, that will cover all quota management stocks and set the total allowable catch and the total allowable commercial catch for all stocks. This will reduce the time and resources needed by businesses to determine compliance. Several changes are aimed, Mr. Speaker, at increasing flexibility. These include changes to the Films, Videos and Publications Classification Act 1993 to modernise labelling requirements by allowing rating and classification labels to be printed. At present, distributors must arrange for the imported DVD or computer game to be unwrapped, to have the printed slick, the leaflet or the notice containing information about the DVD or computer game that we see inserted in any sleeve or display case removed from the case, a label placed over the printed foreign classification label on the front, and then the slick put back into the packaging. This bill will mean that labels can, in addition to being physically attached, be printed directly onto slicks. Giving businesses flexibility as to whether they print on or fix an adhesive label allows choices to be made about the most cost-effective method for supplying the rating or classification label. This will reduce compliance costs by an estimated $2.4 million in the first year and $3.1 million in year 5. I have to say, Mr. Speaker, apparently the industry have been coming to see government each year for many, many years, saying, why is it that we have to put this particular sticker on when it could just be printed at the time of its manufacture? And, Mr. Speaker, amending the Unit Trusts Act 1960 so that financial statements and accounts can be distributed electronically. This will result in savings for printing and for postage costs. The Regulatory Reform Bill is just one of the essential measures needed to implement improvements to regulation in New Zealand. It forms part of the broader regulatory reform agenda that will improve the body of regulation in New Zealand. Last November, I introduced a Regulatory Reform Repeals Bill proposing the repeal of 31 spent acts. I'm also preparing a Regulatory Reform Revocations Order which proposes the revocation of spent and obsolete regulations. This set of legislative vehicles is designed to improve the stock of regulation in New Zealand and will make sure New Zealand has an evolving regulatory environment that is relevant, that is up to date and that is best placed to meet the dynamic economy that will help New Zealand grow. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The question is that the motion be agreed to.